You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. I'm your host, Connie Kuber, with Sealpro Silage Barrier Films by Connor AgriScience. Thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with all your friends. In the West, winter forage harvest is over. Without taking any relevance of that first crop away, I've always thought that this chop is kind of a dress rehearsal for the big corn silage chop. It's a chance to get the kinks out, make sure the protocols are set, and the people and the products are in place. Ask yourself, what did you learn from this harvest and how can you get better? Well, I've got two people today that can help you maybe think through some of those two questions. And my guests today are Ron Kuber with Connor AgriScience and Sealpro Silage Barrier Films, and Donny Rollin of Rollin Ag Resources. Ron, of course, is my husband and business partner, and Donny is a longtime dairy farmer and friend who has recently changed careers to helping dairy farmers do a better job with feeds and cow-side management. I've known both of them for over 40 years, and they have plenty to offer. Before we start, Donny and Ron, could you please introduce yourself and briefly tell how you got to this point in your careers and why you enjoy doing what you do?
Yeah, my name's Donny Rollin, and I'm a new working relationship guy here with Connor AgriScience, and I want to thank Ron and Connie for bringing me into the fold and allowing me to work with dairymen. I grew up on a dairy, was a dairyman all my life, and definitely have seen good, bad, and the ugly as far as silage goes. I've been a part of making all three of those. I've been passionate about the dairy business all my life, and we exited the business here 2 years ago, and I really am excited about having the opportunity to help other dairymen find those lost dollars that they're not making because of small mistakes to big mistakes in their silage process.
Good morning or good evening, all, and thanks for this opportunity. Yeah, Connie, you did a nice job in introducing our business and our longtime relationship. Looking at the background here, it was about 30 years ago that Connor Marketing was formed. CON for the first three letters of your name, and then NOR for Ron spelled backwards. Our initial focus was to help producers implement scientific-based solutions for problems that they have. And our primary focus was on the dairy business. Our early entries were related to nutritional supplements, either as something added to the TMR, the total mixed ration, or something that was either supplemented as a bolus or a liquid drench to help with critical points in the cow's production and reproduction cycles in order to get to maximize their efficiency. And it was around early 2000s, late 99, 2000 that we started to interact with well-known PhDs. Dr. Keith Bolson. In fact, my first job out of college was in sales with Western Livestock Journal and Western Dairy Journal. And I happened to have a chance to hear Dr. Bolson speak, I think it was around 1977, talking about silage inoculants and when they were in some of the very introductory point in the cycle of that technology, some very early lactic acid producing bacteria silages that he was involved with, or silage inoculants he was involved with. But I still remember meeting him at that meeting many years ago and learned a lot from that. And then also with Dr. Lehman Kung from the University of Delaware, who had done a lot of work on the original Buchnerei formulation that was being introduced by one of the companies that we worked very closely with and learned a lot from over the years. What was then the Biotol company, and now Lallemand, with Dr. Bob Charlie as their key resource there. So the three of them, and many others, we learned over the years, and And then in 2006, we had the opportunity to come across the oxygen barrier technology. And that really drove us a full-blown direction towards helping producers to make and manage better forages, whether it's dairy cattle, for cow-calf, or for feedlot use.
Get your Sealpro silage barrier film today. Protect the seed, fertilizer, labor, and expensive inputs that you've invested in. Choose best-in-class Sealpro now in 3 different versions: traditional 2-roll application, our new co-rolled application, and super simple and wildly successful 1-layer film, Sealpro 1. It's easy to buy, easy to use. Contractor covering? We'll work with them. Learn more at sealprosilage.com. That's SEALPRO silage.com. Family owned and operated for over 25 years. 559-779-5961. That's 559-779-5961. Let's start with what you have seen out there this spring from in the winter forage harvest. Is there anything that comes to mind that you've noticed?
I think the beginning of the season, it was really nice to drive to places and see tractors moving on the pile, taking up just a little bit of silage at a time, about 6 inches, and doing a really super job on it. And then as we got further and further into the season, it felt like the panic hit everybody. And I really noticed an incredible difference of beginning of season, mid-season, and late season winter forages being put up. There's going to be a difference for sure in the beginning product that was made versus the middle and the end.
Ron, what did you see out there?
Things started off early in a very calm, measured way. People were the chop length was good. Moisture was in that, dry matter was in that mid-30 range. Things were going along very well. And then we had a big change in the temperature and wind here in the San Joaquin Valley. We started to get temps in the 90 degrees and winds that were drying out the crop very, very quickly. And as the season went on, that became more and more of a challenge. We had made some recommendations to shorten up the chop length, and actually it was 2 weekends after Mother's Day, which is kind of usually things are pretty well wrapped up by Mother's Day weekend. In this case, 2 weeks later, we had one of our customers that had called with a concern about dry matters, that they had ran some checks in the fields, and they were looking at getting upwards of 45 or more dry matter on their triticale. So we made a couple of phone calls brought the nutritionist into this. We reached out to our inoculant supplier, their tech services team, and put together a game plan to monitor what they're doing, change over once they got to that 45 to change over to a Buchnerai material, which will help out with the aerobic stability in that higher dry matter, low density forage when they were feeding it out next year.
Let's move on now then to preparing for the corn silage harvest, which, could start out here as early as end of July, right?
Some of our customers in Arizona, I know we're going to be good. They're going to be starting in probably maybe in the latter part of June. Yeah, Donnie, down in Kern County, you'll probably have some guys starting early. What sort of time frame there?
Yeah, I think you're going to see probably, mid to late July will be the first harvest that shows up on the corn silage side. There's definitely fields that I've driven by that are already, waist high, if not a teeny bit more than that.
So Donnie, as a dairy farmer, then let's talk about planning for that harvest. How did you work with your nutritionist on a structured harvest plan, and why was that important?
I could always considered our nutritionist one of the most important members on our team, taking care of our business the way it needed to be. And if we didn't deliver quality silage to the cows, we didn't get the milk we wanted. We didn't get the repro we wanted. We didn't get the herd health that we wanted. But on his side, I know in times when you're working through some silage that's just not that great, he always would ask, do you want me to go get my magic wand? Because there's a certain amount of shifting around that he needs to do to make some of those feeds feedable in a way that it makes you money. you just kind of notching off a few cents here and there. We always talked pregame with silage, and one of the things that we did early on with our nutritionist, who we worked with him for 17 years. We both were on the same page with trying to get together with our custom chopper, with our silage crew, with our employees, everybody that's connected to that. And then I would say the other key group in there was you, Ron, and Connie, who brought really a lot of adjustments to our silage program and challenged us. And I always appreciated that, as well as our nutritionist, to get together and lay everything out on the table that this is where we would like to see it go. Here's how we want to do things. And then, like we talked about just a little bit earlier with winter forages, there comes a certain point where, there's a little bit of panic maybe at the end trying to get everything done right, where you're doing the best that you can, but you want as much of it as you can to go exactly the way you plan it. So what we did meetings with our employees, we did meetings with our our harvesters and cover people.
Once you had made that plan, I would think that once you made that plan once, it was fairly easy to follow through year after year with bringing up those same kinds of issues and talking about things, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I think the best part about doing it the way we did was to talk with our chopper and say, here's where we want the chop length to be. Here's what we want to see with our kernel processing. Here's what we want to see with our packing. And it makes it easier as a farmer to go out and observe. And I think that's one of the key things is to make sure that you're back through observing what's going on to make sure it meets your standards and it meets what you discussed. Because the discussions with your chopper aren't an adversarial role. You guys should be rowing the same direction, and to have your already laid out plans on where you want to go. It's easy to say, hey, you know what, the chop length's just a little bit longer than we want, or it's a little bit shorter than we want. So can we tighten that up?
Once that plan was made, how hard was it to follow? And how do you make changes as you go along?
Once you've decided on a chopper, if you have a long relationship and a friendship, sometimes it can be difficult to make those adjustments that you need to make. But they need to understand that you get one shot at putting this up right, and the financial viability of your dairy rests on feeding quality forages, what you have to put up at one time. So it can be difficult having those relationships and trying to maneuver through, but I found that the people that we had identified and worked with definitely responded when we talked about, hey, we're a little off here on this. Can your guys, I see the guy on the dozer sitting at the bottom of the pile. Can he, make sure he's running that dozer? One of the things that we've seen at our dairy in particular, and I see it at other places too when we do audit on them, is a little higher ash than you'd like to see, and it's hard to get the dozer driver not to take ash up onto the pile and to get them to leave a nice big carpet out there to work on so that you don't take too much dirt in and create more problems with it. Those kind of discussions, I think it's easy to have them. Everybody should be on the same page with where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. I don't think it needs to, by any means, be adversarial an issue. We're just
Right.
talking about fine tuning in the heat of the moment there.
Right. Talking about ash and pulling ash up, if you're lucky enough to have a nice pad, that's one thing. But one thing that I know we've seen over the years is making sure that you have enough space to have drive over piles. So, Ron, how should dairy farmers go about making that space and using it to the best of their advantage? And what successes and failures have you seen?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. It comes into the both the short and the long term planning aspects of your silage program. And from from a long term standpoint, we see a lot of facilities that cows are added over the years, but no concrete surface was provided to allow for appropriate storage of the fermented feeds required to keep those animals moving forward with the kind of production that you want of either milk and beef. Looking at the planning side, I mean, a long-term strategy is to map out, okay, what is your needs going to be? Short term, you got to figure out what you're going to do for the next harvest. But long term, also take into account what is your current feed inventory? What is the rate that you're going to be removing what you've got, whether it's in bunkers or drive over piles? And then have an initial plan based on, okay, what is the expected crop this coming year, and then run some calculations based on what can we put on the best surface that we've got available, whether that's concrete that's capped with asphalt, or concrete that's been capped with an appropriate sealant to give you to protect the concrete from the silage acids that tend to etch away with that. And that's another, again, long-term story on that. You want to make sure that whatever you plan for, if you contact myself or Donnie or one of our folks with Sealpro, Connor AgriScience group, we can help guide you or your nutritionist through some recommendations of sizing piles. The other thing is to have a plan B and a plan C. Okay, if we have a bumper crop, and this goes back to what Donnie was talking about with bringing the nutritionist into, and this is where I think it's important to have a discussion based on this last year. What happened? What were the things going on during the year as you fed your 2024 corn silage crop, or even your 2023 corn silage crop? Was there some things that happened at certain points in the year that was a challenge that had something to do with how was that crop handled at the time of harvest? Was there a situation where you had some lodging and then you just, you had your chopper contractor do the best that he could with what he had there to deal with, and then you put it in the middle of the pile, and then you ended up with some challenged feed in the middle of your corn silage inventory. When you got to it, you had to make a decision on how you were going to feed through this. If you've got some other options for storing, perhaps you could take that lodge field and put it in a separate pile, and that way you're not. I mean, it's kind of like if you're adding it to your the best stuff that you've got. It's like trying to dilute spoiled milk with good milk. You're going to make everything spoiled. And that's the same way with a silage pile on that if you've got a challenged area. So talk to your nutritionist, look at what his, he or she's input on what were the challenges this last year, that maybe with a little bit of planning and thinking things through in advance, you can have a game plan in place to take a detour and not have it create a wreck in your feeding in 2026.
So what if we get to the end of so we've planned out this pile and we're harvesting, going along, everything's fine. And then we figure out that we're going to go too high, or we don't have enough room in our bunker, or what do we do then?
Well, that's where plan C comes in. And if you have to, have an area that, even if you got to put it on dirt, that's going to be better than just trying to fluff it up on top. I mean, I've seen, there's been, in fact, Donnie and I went to a couple of dairies this spring where we were looking at corn silage piles that were put up last fall, and it was very evident that that's what they did. There were some extra loads. They just bladed them across the top, and because of the way the pile was shaped, even though they can move it from the dump area to the top of the pile, there was no way that they could get an effective packing on that to get the air out. You ended up with higher dry matters. You ended up with a higher shrink loss on there. You ended up with more dry matter loss because the density number was not achievable.
So then, as part of that whole harvest plan, it's working with the nutritionist, working with your contractors if you have them, and the people that work with you on this. But we also have some outside resources to consider in the way of of products and people. And one of these is inoculants. Ron, how do you advise farmers on choosing an appropriate inoculant, and what are your best tips on using them appropriately?
Again, I'll go back to your nutritionist is part of this conversation on there. Because there might be some things that he or she would maybe have some new information that's out there in the industry. There may be some other situations where they've come across challenges. Certainly, there are some chopping contractors out there that are doing a good job with having an open and honest discussion about the options. There are some others that are maybe looking to do what's the most convenient for them. And I don't want to throw anyone under the bus on this, but just be prepared to ask some questions, look to a number of different resources, and make sure that your chopping contractor does have the equipment that can effectively keep the bugs alive that are in the bacteria. It's a live bacterial product, so it's excessive temperatures are going to be a big challenge. So if you've got a clear tank sitting up on top of the chopper, or mounted by the hydraulic manifold with temperatures exceeding 90 to 100 degrees, there's a pretty good chance you're going to have stuff that's going to be dead if it going on to the silage as it's being added. Be an informed consumer of that material, and make sure that you've got everyone on your team dialed into the most effective use of that, so it has a good outcome.
Okay. And so there's inoculants that incorporate buchneri, some that don't. So what are the differences there, real briefly, and how do you use those?
Big picture difference. Well, you have the traditional lactic acid bacteria, and this goes back to my first education by Dr. Keith Bolson back in the late 70s, where there'd be a lactic acid bacteria that you would flood the zone with bacteria that would grow very quickly, produce lactic acid, and would drop the pH to make a stable silage, and then in the absence of oxygen. With the buchneri, which that came into play through the research of Dr. Bob Charley and Dr. Lehman Kong that I also referenced, that was introduced, I believe it was fall of 2000, that it was either late 99 or early 2000 that it was approved by the USDA for incorporation into cattle feed. And this organism, what it does, it does produce lactic acid. It's a heterofermenter. It's not just a homolactic. It doesn't produce just lactic acid. It produces a combination lactic acid, a little bit of prop acid, and then acetic acid over the storage phase. So that acetic acid is what provides protection against aerobic instability during storage and feed out. So as long as everything is sealed properly and there's no air coming in, everything is stable, cool, sleeping, nothing's happening. Once you get some oxygen coming in, maybe that would come from a coyote digging a hole, trying to chase a mouse on the silage pile. Maybe it would come from some crows coming across and flying on down to the top of the pile, poking holes through there. You'll end up with these little microenvironments that are heavily oxygenated, and that's where you're going to start getting deterioration even during the storage phase. But more importantly, if you're getting heating on the face of the silage, that's something which the buchneri, a properly researched buchneri bacteria can make a big difference in the quality of the feed that you're delivering to the bunk. Donnie's family was one of the first, a neighbor of theirs were the first ones to use the buchneri 40788 when that came out 25 years ago.
With our nutritionist, the one thing I always appreciated about him was he's very science oriented and science based. And any dairyman listening here right now can vouch that you get so many people coming to your place with different products, and not all of them have the research behind them. It's important to work with your nutritionist to find a very well researched and proven product that delivers you, because if you buy some inoculant from somebody because they're a friend, you can easily get duped into spending money you really didn't get the most bang for your buck out of it. And it's important to buy things for your silage that are researched and proven and tested by time.
From our experience too, we've had these inputs that we putting in like inoculant, and then we're going to talk about oxygen barrier here in a minute, are things that we extra things we paid for, but we have to remember that we also paid for a lot of seed, and we paid for a lot of fertilizer, and we paid for a lot of water in our case out here in the West. And these are input costs that are part of the product. And I feel like there's a lot of people who get excited about planting in the spring and fertilizing and all that stuff, and then by the time it comes to harvest, they're done, and it's another expense. Well, it is an expense that is also going to make you money in the end. So Ron, you want to talk about oxygen barriers a little bit, just to give a brief summary of the most people that are listening probably use them already, but what's the difference between oxygen barriers? Are they all the same?
Absolutely not. We had not all oxygen barriers are the same, just as not all the genetics of all cows and the beef herd is all the same. There's a lot of differences that you can see, maybe outside appearance, color, perhaps, maybe the feel. Well, thickness, sometimes the perception is that the thicker is better, but there's a number of things that go into an effective oxygen barrier film. And the first is going to be the materials that are used, the quality of the materials. And for example, with our Sealpro films, on all the barrier materials, we're using 100% virgin materials. So we have a consistency of the input. And that's not to say that using recycled material is a bad thing. It just becomes a challenge when you're trying to make something that is 1.8 mil or 45 microns thick or thin, and have a uniform distribution of the oxygen barrier polymer. And in our case, we use it's a EVOH, a polymer that was developed actually for the meat industry years ago to be able to help get longer shelf life, to protect the meat that's cut on the counter. The EVOH came from that usage, and then there was a evolution to be able to put that into films that are 65, 80 foot, 100 plus feet wide, and then be able to do a better job of being able to seal a silage pile from oxygen, or the top surface of a bunker silo.
And I think it's important that our listeners know too that the oxygen barriers, on a really good oxygen barrier, the oxygen that's there in the pile is not going to go anywhere, just like the oxygen could potentially come into the pile is not going to get in there. Whatever you haven't packed out is still going to be there.
Exactly. And this was something, this was illustrated with something I learned from Dr. Keith Bolson early when we were introducing oxygen barrier technology into the West. This would have been like 07 or 08. And then this was a case where we had really high dry matter triticale, which is hard to pack to begin with, and the material was not packed. So when they started feeding out, we see about 6 to 12 inches from the outer surface, you can see a very distinct white mold line on there, pretty uniform. Of course, the first thought from the producer was, well, this oxygen barrier doesn't work. And as we got into bringing a few PhDs out, including I think we had Dr. Lehman Kung out and Dr. Bolson out to go take a look at it, and the assessment was that white mold that was formed in the first 12 to 24 hours on there. The lack of barrier in the past would have turned that low density material into instead of being a 1 foot of winter forage, it would have taken it down to about a 2 or 3 inch slime layer on there. And that, the fact that was not the case here now meant that the barrier did do its job, and it stabilized what was there from getting any worse. But it will not extract oxygen. That would be a cool feature, but we've not seen that capability yet.
We're not there yet. Let's turn to a little different aspect here of harvest. Donnie, as one who's lived through a number of harvests, what tips can you give to farmers to help with communication, and why is this important?
here already. We talked about how important it is to communicate with all your people, whether it's your men that are there on the dairy with you, or your contractor that's coming in to do your harvest, or contractor that is doing your covering. And if you're doing it yourself, then you really need to be in tune with getting your plastics on right away after. And I would drive around and observe, and if there was something that needed to be changed, then I would talk with the harvesting contractor if that's who it related to. Hey, I see the pile, because I've seen this on quite a few piles where the dozer driver will push up on each side, but not really drive over the middle. And I noticed when we did get into the pile, it actually shrunk in the middle of the pile where it wasn't packed properly, and we had a little bit of spoilage in the middle. So going up and just saying, hey, I really need for you to, drive over the middle too, push that over the middle of the pile as well and roll over it. Again, I know we talked about earlier, I don't think there has to be anything adversarial, but just the fact that you got boots in the field there, I think is important, so that they know that you're watching what's going on, because you're putting up, some of these guys are putting up hundreds of thousands of dollars in a couple of weeks, if not $1 million in a week of silage. And if you shrink up 10% of that or 15% of that, it's a significant number. So that they all have to understand that you really need that done that way. I know my brother and I worked together on the farm for the covering. We always made sure that as we got, right at the end of the pile there, and we're starting to roll over it, that we called our contractor and said, hey, we just finished. They're finalizing the pile and they're going to load the tractor up right now. And I think the sooner the better you can, to get your covering contractor to come out. And I know I've heard guys say, 12 to 24 hours, the sooner you can get on, the better, where you can get your barrier film on and your tarp on top of it.
Or line up your football team as they do in the Midwest.
Yep.
Okay, well, this is all great information about harvest. We've talked about harvest planning, pile sizing, inoculant choices, oxygen barriers, communications, and working with these contractors. Donnie and Ron, is there anything that either one of you would like to add, or something that we missed?
Again, do your research. Make sure you're working with a trusted supplier that is not just out there to sell you something, is looking to work with you and your nutritional advisor and your chopping contractor to come up with the best combination of materials and a process to make sure, to the best of everyone's ability, to have a good outcome. And part of that has to do with, following up, after the harvest, and doing an evaluation of how, what things look like, what things test like, what sort of, temps and packing densities and so forth. And be an informed buyer, include, your team members of whether it's on your operation that are involved in the feeding, involved in the nutritional advice of your operation.
Donnie, anything to add?
I would say that you have a lot of things going on when you're putting up your silage, and you have a lot invested in your silage program. I'm not one to just fly off the handle and change somebody that's a contractor if we can work things out and get where we need to go. But I can't stress enough for farmers that if you have somebody that's not getting it done and you analyze your silage crop, it's okay to make a change. And at a certain point you have to. And I just know one year I had a guy that was chopping for me, and the owner of the business was out at our farm, and I had a field which was probably 50 yards away from where our pile was. There were 6 trucks lined up all day long to get on that pile and dump with one dozer. They had 2 choppers running the field, and I asked him, I said, hey, I really need for you to run one chopper. And he looked at me and said, I can't do that. I'll lose money. And I thought, well, okay, so one of us is going to lose money here. So the next time that I signed up for a chopper, that was not the person that I signed up with, because it cost me a lot of money in densities and dry matter losses to have him work for me. You can't be afraid to pull the trigger if you have all the right information that says you're not getting what you're paying for. You need to do it.
Well, great. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for talking with us today. I'm going to go ahead and give our website in case that anybody has any questions about any of these things. Phone numbers are on there too, but we have a learning center tab at Connor AgriScience, and that's ConnorAgriScience.com. Long one, but it's ConnorAgriScience.com. And again, go to the Learning Center. You can also get to that page through our SealproSilage.com website. That's Sealpro, SEALPRO, Silage, SILAGE, all one word, .com. Well, thank you, Ron and Donnie, for your thoughts today. This has been a very helpful conversation. And we've been talking about forage harvest with Ron Kuber, Connor AgriScience, and Sealpro Silage Barrier Films, and Donny Rollin of Rollin Ag Resources. I'm Connie Kuber with Sealpro Silage Barrier Film by Connor AgriScience, and you have been listening to the Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News. Please subscribe, like, and share this podcast. We appreciate the perseverance of all dairy farmers as you take on opportunities to get better. One thing we didn't talk about that is very near and dear to our hearts is silage safety. And you can go back through some previous episodes of the Dairy Voice podcast and take a listen to that. We also have safety information on our website. But please stay safe out there. It's a very, very important part of harvest. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again very soon.